Good to see you again this week. I wanted to start by sharing with you something maybe you know a little something about, and that's life in the midst of a pandemic. Well, it was a virus that began in animals and crossed over into humans. It was a new disease, and it was spreading rapidly with enormous social consequences. And there were lots of folks pointing fingers. Who's to blame? In the midst of it all, it was a time of political instability and division. Hey, that sound familiar to you? Well, the interesting thing is I'm not talking about 2020, but about 250 AD. Sometimes it's easy to forget we're not the only folks who've gone through something like this. In fact, the world has seen a number of pandemics. And yes, there are a lot of similarities, but there were some differences. They didn't know the cause of the illness that was sweeping through the human population. They didn't know how it spread, and they didn't know what they could do to prevent getting sick. And sadly, that pandemic lasted for more than a decade. But what happened in that pandemic made a huge difference in the world. You see, as persons were becoming sick out of fear, many fled, leaving behind the sick to tend to themselves. But those who follow Christ Jesus exhibited a completely, radically different behavior. They stayed to help others, Christian or not. They left behind a legacy of love. They created local structures to ease the task of healing the poor and the sick. They provided food and clothing and money and all that was needed for ongoing care and comfort. Well, this week we are looking at love. And I'm reading just a few short verses out of James' letter, the 2nd chapter. I'm just going to read the 14th through the 17th verse. I do invite you to read all of James. It's got a lot of practical advice. James says, "What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? Suppose a brother or a sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, 'Go in peace, keep warm and well fed,' but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead." Now, there are a lot of passages to choose from to talk about love, and so you might be wondering, why this one? In fact, it's a little strange that the word love doesn't even appear in this passage of James' letter, and yet it is a passage all about love. It seems that even in the early church, emerging among the early Christians, there was a problem. The folks who were following Jesus always seemed to have the right words to say, but what they were doing wasn't matching what they were saying. James draws an over-the-top picture of a Christian running into a person with obvious needs, without food, without clothing, totally vulnerable. And face to face with this overwhelming need, this Christian pats the other on the back and offers a pious "God bless you" and walks away. In his translation, Eugene Peterson in the Message says, "Dear friends, do you think you'll get anywhere in this if you learn all the right words but never do anything? Does merely talking about faith indicate that a person really has it? Isn't it obvious that God talk without God acts is outrageous nonsense?" Now we know Jesus is perfectly clear that the greatest commandment is love. Love God, love neighbor. Jesus ties together our love of God, whom we cannot see, to loving those made in the image of God, whom we can see. You see, love isn't a matter of how we feel. Love is what we do. And the primary component of biblical love is not affection, but commitment. As one commentator says, love is not an emotion, but a dogged, tenacious commitment to the well-being of others. Or maybe you could sum it all up by saying, love does. Love takes us up close and personal with the needs of the world, with those who are without, the vulnerable, the hungry, the thirsty, the outsiders, the sick, the prisoners. And faith is embodied in countless small acts of love. We show what we believe by what we do. In Galatians chapter 5, Paul puts it this way: the only thing that counts is faith expressing itself through love. All of this brings to mind for me a woman by the name of Therese of Lisieux. She earned the nickname the Little Flower. Oh, she never set out to be noticed by anybody. All she wanted was to allow God's love to shine through everything she did. Therese wrote this. She says, "Love proves itself by deeds. So how am I to show my love? Great deeds are forbidden me. The only way I can prove my love is by scattering flowers. And these flowers are every little sacrifice, every glance and word, and the doing of the least actions for love." A couple centuries later, Mother Teresa said it this way: "We cannot all do great things, but we can do small things with great love." Now, in this global pandemic, some folks are focused on questions like why? Why me? Why us? Why now? Or some folks are focused on the who question. Who's responsible for this? Who's to blame? Now, N.T. Wright suggests that as Christ followers, maybe rather than getting stuck on the questions of why or who, about pointing the blame or pointing the finger or looking for someone to blame, we might ask ourselves a whole different set of questions. The who question, like who's most vulnerable in the midst of this crisis? Who is being harmed? Or where? Where are they? Where are these most vulnerable? Where are these who are being harmed? And what? What can we do about it? How might we extend help, hope, healing, care, concern, and love? You know, perhaps what happens in the midst of this pandemic will continue to make a huge difference in the world. As we are those who are Christ followers, who allow God's love to shine through everything we do, so that even doing little things with great love, we leave behind a legacy of love that speaks volumes to our world. After all, Jesus said, "By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." Blessings to you this week.